Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you all for joining us today for the first session of our first ever NCMA virtual midyear event. For those I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Tom Finch, and I'm with RCP Block and Brick in San Diego, California. More importantly, as it relates to my role here today, I have the privilege of serving this year as the chairman of the board of your association. That means that today I also get the pleasure of serving as the moderator of this first session, which is structured much like the town hall meetings that are used to be having when we meet in person. These are unique times for all of us, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this week. We have some great presentations coming your way over the next few days, and we look forward to your participation. I'll have more about what you can expect over the next couple of days, and in the meantime, we have a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. If you can hear my voice and see my screen, congrats. You have demonstrated how technologically savvy you are, an important skill as we continue working more virtually than ever before. We're using several different platforms throughout the midyear event in order to provide the best technology for each unique session. In this session, we'll be using the Adobe Connect platform. When you entered the session, your audio and webcam were automatically muted. That means that other participants cannot hear or see you. This will create the best experience for our many attendees to hear and see the presenters. But don't worry, you can participate. Type in a question at any time in the Q&A section of your screen, and we'll ask our presenters to address as many questions as we possibly can. Attendees may participate in this session by using the Q&A box. Should you need any help, no problem. We're here to help. Please contact Randy on the information that you see on the screen here, and she will be happy to assist you. Let me remind you, please note that this session is being recorded and that any of us that are part of this audio and video are consenting to being recorded by the presentation, by our presentation here. All participants are expected to exhibit professional behavior in compliance with NCMA's antitrust policy, as well as the NCMA's anti-harassment policy, both of which can be found on the midyear event website. As noted on this slide, please refrain, intervene, or disengage from any appropriate discussions and report any concerns directly to an NCMA staff person. And now I'd like to take a moment to thank our 2020 midyear event sponsors. They have each made a generous commitment to this event, and we very much appreciate your support. Please be sure to visit the NCMA midyear event website and the Meet the Sponsors section of this midyear event platform to meet all of our sponsors. While on this topic, I want to take a moment to reflect on the many ways our associate members truly do support this association and the producer members. They're committed to all of us individually, and they are committed to all of our events, especially our midyear meetings and the annual conventions. They also support our Icon Expo trade show events, our B2B events, and during time when we can't get together in person, they're supporting us right here. I want all of our associate members to know that they are very much appreciated. And if we were here in Milwaukee right now, I'd be asking everybody in the audience to please stand up, and I'd like to give you guys a standing ovation. You guys really are the bloodline of our association, and we thank you very much. I mentioned the Icon Expo earlier, and so while we're on the subject, we want to remind you about an upcoming machinery and equipment show that will be held next February in Nashville. And to help with that, we've got a very special guest with us this morning. I'd like to take a moment to introduce him to you. Staff Sergeant Kenny Thomas's experience as a member of the 3rd Ranger Battalion is recounted in the highly successful book and movie, Black Hawk Down. Kenny is also an award-winning country music recording artist and songwriter. He will be the featured speaker at the 2021 Icon Expo opening brunch on February 12th in Nashville, and he will be performing a few of his songs for us at the Icon Expo reception that evening. Hey, we're looking forward to having you with us next February, Kenny, and we appreciate you being with us today. Please welcome Kenny Thomas.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, y'all. Welcome to the NCMA Mid-Year event. Looking forward to seeing you guys next year at the Icon event on 12 February 2021 in my hometown of Nashville. In the meantime, hope you have a great conference, great event. You learn something, you go home motivated. More importantly, though, for the rest of this year, stay purposeful out there. Stay meaningful. Take care of each other. Stay safe. Godspeed, and Rangers lead the way.
Thanks, Kenny. We look forward to having you with us. Sounds like we have some really special things planned for everyone at the show in Nashville. So everyone, please be sure to put February 12th and 13th on your calendar. Before we get started into the town hall, I have a special message from one of our sponsors, Hopwork Test Group. And now let's get to the heart of our program. Today we have a great lineup of speakers for you covering the following important topics. We have Rocky Jenkins talking about observations of our industry in this pandemic. Bob Thomas will give you a preview of the virtual mid-year event. Major Ogilvy will give you an update on the CMU checkoff program. Evan Reese will talk about the resilient strategies for U.S. construction. And Kate Simonin, the carbon future and its impact on construction decisions. With no further ado, Let me turn you got it, Rock? We're going to turn it over to you, Rock.
We've got it. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Good morning to everyone. As you saw, my mission this morning is to share with you some observations about our industry during a time of pandemic. I wanted to start out with kind of an overall view of the state of our industry. I think for the most of us, we would be able to say that quarter two of this year ended better than anticipated, what we anticipated at the beginning of the quarter. I think in most states our businesses were considered essential businesses, and therefore we were able to weather the storm during that first quarter. So if I summed up, I guess, the current state of our industry overall, I would say that it's stable and that we are currently contending is a word. I was going to use coping. I like the word contending with our circumstances. And so I want to emphasize that I think the overall state of our industry is positive. However, I do believe there is an elephant in the room, and if left unchallenged, it could adversely affect our businesses. So in February, we were all able to be together in Salt Lake City, and we heard some rumblings about some corona thing coming out of China. A very short period after we returned to our homes and our businesses, a COVID pandemic, a period of time that's been described as you see on the screen. It's an unrivaled time. It's unprecedented. It's unmatched. It's unequal. Our business lives and our personal lives were very disrupted during that time period. And then personally, and hopefully I'm not on an island by myself in this regard, I found myself internalizing a lot of questions, as you can see on the screen. Is this COVID stuff for real? Oh, shoot, I've got 3 of the increased risk factors. Am I going to get sick and die? All of these questions entered your mind. When it comes to the business, how will my business survive? I've got great employees. I don't want to lose my employees. All of these major concerns. And then you add the checkoff, you add the election, and all of a sudden you feel like your head's going to explode. So while the overall state of our business, I believe, is positive, is optimistic, we weathered quarter one, I do believe that we can't ignore the elephant in the room that I talked about, and that is the uncertainty that we as leaders and all of our employees are dealing with. So I want to take a look at a couple of outside the industry professionals that have some things to say in the area of uncertainty. This is Dr. Mike Roncesvalles. He recently launched a website, livewellcoaching.com. And just to quote him in a couple of areas, perhaps not surprisingly, I am most concerned as a clinical psychologist about how the fallout of COVID-19 will impact us emotionally. He said there's never been another moment in our lifetime that has been wrought with such collective uncertainty. And you'll see at the end of his statement that we are primed to be intensely reactive in our social lives. Then another outside expert, Lorraine Kwai, fascinating background. She's an FBI counterintelligence agent. She retired from the FBI after 20 plus years. And she runs a business mental toughness center. She's a trainer and coach within that business. But you can see her quote, "Experiencing uncertainty is different than taking a risk." And we as business owners, business owners and business leaders, we're familiar with taking risks. It's a probability that something will or will not happen. However, uncertainty is altogether a different beast, and it's something that we can't always predict an outcome. And so she went on to say that mental toughness is the ability to break unproductive patterns of behavior. It is managing your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in ways that will set you up for success. So those are a couple of outside industry expert perspectives. So how are we as leaders in our industry going to take the out of uncertainty? And so what I want to do, we have a couple of videos from some of the leaders in our industry who have been doing that, taking steps to take that on out of uncertainty. And before we look at two of those videos, I wanted to, Besser did provide a video for us to use for this, and due to time constraints, we were not able to put it in. So I want to thank Besser, Kevin Curtis, and his team for doing that video. Kevin did have one significant quote that I wanted to make before we go into the two videos. So this is from Kevin Curtis, the CEO of Besser Company. Staying open throughout the COVID pandemic did not come without its own set of struggles. We were tasked with intense daily protocols to ensure the safety and health of our teams. With the full, and he goes on to mention at that point all of the different protocols that they had to put in place. And then he finishes by saying, with the full support of our management team, we have fulfilled those obligations. So we see in this first comment by Kevin that it takes a whole team, it takes a village to take care of our businesses and to make it happen. And then Kathleen will move on to the next slide with Bruce.
Hi, I'm Bruce Blair, President and CEO of Consumers Concrete. Consumers Concrete is located in Southwest Michigan. In Michigan, because of the stay-at-home, stay-safe executive order, we were basically down from March 24th to May 11th. We only ran for a short period of time to supply some critical infrastructure projects that we were doing, and the guys that ran the machine all agreed to come in during that time period. We were also successful in securing a PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loan. Once we secured that in mid to late April, we brought everyone back to work, and almost everyone came into work. We paid them for that 50 hours, whether they worked or not, and anyone that did work, we paid them an additional $3 an hour. We did this in an effort to counter the $600 bump in unemployment that they received. In Michigan, basically, if you make less than $24 an hour, you're almost better off on unemployment. But because we brought them back fairly early on and kept them engaged, we communicated with them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, we were able to get them back to work when we wanted them to work on May 11th. And they came back with a very good attitude. This wasn't the case for all of our customers. They had a difficult time getting some of their people back and off unemployment. So overall, we are doing well now. We're back basically to 100%. Other than losing about a month or a little over a month, we're doing well. Thanks.
So thank you, Bruce, for taking the time to share those comments with us. And then Kathleen will move right into the video with Rick.
Block and Hardscape. Hello from Rick Muth, Oracle Block and Hardscape. Here's what we did about the virus contagion. I belong to boards on the university and the Performing Arts Center, and we come across a lot of things about large crowds. We have our own institution, our particular needs. So we took the best ideas we could to make our customers and our staff feel safe. With that, what can we do to make our staff feel as comfortable as possible? Why don't we have a $500 contest, a winner that's chosen by the majority of the staff at our company, came up with some great ideas, we implemented them, and that is the best thing we did as far as making our people feel that we were interested in their safety as well as our customers.
All right, so thank you, Rick. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Kevin. or for sharing with us. I think as I wrap up this part of our presentation, our industry's doing well. We're moving forward in the midst of this pandemic. I really liked from these videos from member leadership that they've shared with us that it's about our people. Our people are facing uncertainties. We as leaders are facing uncertainties. They don't have predicted outcomes. So let's take that elephant. Let's cut the out of uncertainty. So just a plug for general session 2 tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I'll be moderating a panel of experts. Pierre Villery will be talking to us about an economic forecast. Jen Goodman with a construction outlook, and Tom Morris will be giving us some information on some long-term societal trends that and he sees how they're going to be changing and being effective moving forward. I think you're going to find that their comments are definitely going to be cutting the out of uncertainty and give you some hope and optimism as we move forward. So thank you very much for letting us participate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rock. Hey, I think we can all sympathize with what you're talking about and what we're all going through right now. And yeah, stay safe, everybody, and keep doing what you're doing to keep your businesses going strong. Okay, next we have our NCMA president, Bob Thomas. He's with us to help us know just a little bit more about what to expect from this virtual event format and how we're going to be able to make the most of it. Take it away, Bob.
Sure, thanks, Tom. But I got to admit, the first question for me is, what to expect. Boy, I don't know what to expect anymore. Do you? I mean, this 2020 has been an awfully weird year. I got to tell you, nothing to me seems normal. Does it feel normal to you?
Nothing's normal, Bob, and every day changes.
All right, so I tell you what does feel normal is this feels normal, right? I mean, this looks like what we did at our convention back in February when we were out in Salt Lake City, and this would feel normal if we got to do this now, right? But if you notice, there's one thing that almost already feels unnormal about that picture, and that's how close everybody is, right? How they're interacting and engaging with each other. I don't see a whole lot of social distancing going on. Do you?
No, they're getting right in the mix right there, I'll tell you.
Well, the one thing that I think that we do have to acknowledge, and Rocky kind of brought it up, but, we all have to evolve, right? We all got to change. And so in some ways, this mid-year event is just another example of what we need to do, to take advantage of the new circumstances. So the one thing that I will tell you, though, is that as much as I would like to be together in Milwaukee, I've been really looking forward to this event, because if you think about it, what we're able to do here virtually is different than what we can do together in person. So I hope we don't have to do this all the time, but we looked at this as an opportunity to bring in more and different speakers that we might not normally have been able to attract if we had to have them travel. And so I think if you look at the schedule, there's a great lineup of speakers and content that we have for this session. And it's also a way to touch some more people that we don't normally have. So, coming into this session, we had 300 people or so that were registered for the event. So I think that's great, and we're looking forward to to a good week in terms of how to figure this out, right? So there are a couple of things that I do just want to make sure that people understand from a technical perspective in terms of managing the technology, which, as you said at the beginning, obviously, if you're on and participating, you can hear us. You've already navigated a good part of the challenges and obstacles of working in this new platform. But just so you know, every single event does have its own link, its own session, and so you want to make sure that you're going in through the mid-year event platform to be able to connect to each and every single one of those. And so, the other thing that you want to make sure that you've done, if you haven't done it already, is create your own profile within that platform and create your own password. And of course, we've got Randy Hertzberg and other staff, her number's here on the screen, and you can also reach her at rhertzberg@ncma.org. So feel free to just reach out to any one of us, and we'll help you figure out how to get connected if for some reason you get lost in the process. But, the one thing that you will note is that if you look at our schedule, there are no committee meetings on this schedule. So as we said, when we were looking for a new way of doing things, we decided to create an event that would provide those attendees that were coming with the most information and delivered in the most efficient manner. So our committee meetings are a very important part of NCMA's activities and processes. And so we did conduct all those meetings. So those happened over the last 4 to 6 weeks or so. They've got a whole slew of recommendations that they will be presenting to the NCMA Board of Directors, which meets on Thursday of this week. And they'll actually be showcasing some of the things that they're working on, particularly from the market segment sessions that are coming up over the next couple of days. So I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can see that there's a whole lot of different types of sessions that are here that go on throughout most of the day. Some even go into the evening. So take a look around, explore through those, figure out which ones you like. You can even set them up so that they're on your own personal schedule through the platform, so that they'll add calendar invites and things, directly into your calendars. But, we've got general sessions, this one being the first one. We're starting each day with a general session. Tomorrow, as Rocky previewed, is kind of looking at forecasting into the future. And then, Tom, you're hosting again kind of the State of the Association and the Foundation on Thursday morning. So we've got market segment forums on both days. So if you have people that are particularly interested in one of those market segment forums or another, feel free to pass on information to them. Like I said, normally we have a certain number of people that come to our meetings, but since we're virtual, anybody on your staff can participate. We made it free for members, so feel free to encourage people on your staff to do it. Various forums, we've got some government affairs sessions, and we've even got something to try to make up for the fact that we don't have as much socializing and network going on. So we've got some social events that are happening in the evening. Heck, I even got talked into doing one of those sessions. So we'll see how that goes, right? But anyway, so my encouragement is just immerse yourself and have fun with it. And again, let us know how we can help.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, and I'd like to just commend you, the staff, the leadership team too, because a lot of people just said, heck, 2020's it's a year that nothing's going to happen, and in NCMA fashion, we didn't let that happen. So kudos to everybody that made this happen this week, and I'm glad we can all get out information, communicate, and get some work done. So thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Kathleen, can I get a slide up? Oh, sorry. It's over for you. All right. Next up, let's move on to the topic that has been a regular staple at all of our town hall meetings for many years. Major Ogilvie of Ready Mix USA, a Cemex company, has served as the CMU Checkoff Initiative Chair since 2011. We have thanked him profusely for his leadership in this area many times over. But being the humble and modest man that Major is, he would say, y'all, it's been a team effort. I got to ask you, Major, have you seen the goal line yet?
Tom, we've been looking at that goal line and letting that goal line draw us to it for a good while now. We're going to get there.
Good to hear, Major. Take it away.
Tom, thank you. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And gosh, like everyone else, I miss being with y'all, but hope everybody's doing well. And as Kenny mentioned a little earlier, being purposeful with our lives. And I wish you and your family all the best. I do have an update, but before I do that, Anderson Williams with Semi Resources has provided a little video for us, about a minute long, and it's called It's Time. All right. Well, good morning. We got a game now, and again, I hope everyone's doing well. And Tom, appreciate you kind of injecting my mush mouth, my southern mush mouth, chuckle, but I appreciate that. And, you know, all of us are really excited for you and your family and the new arrival. Wish y'all all the best and to take care. Y'all, since
Thank you, Major.
Salt Lake City, we've dealt with COVID, and I think all of us are aware of that. But a number of updates. We continue to move forward. Some highlights, I guess. A number of us were headed to Washington, D.C. on Thursday, March the 12th to meet with the Deputy Secretary and officially submit our order. But the night before, things were shut down by our company, so I wasn't able to go, and we had to call that off due to the COVID. But we did submit the order officially on April the 15th, and so that's another step forward for us. Many of you heard back in early part of July on our path forward that the Department of Commerce put together that, you know, we had some steps put forward there too. A couple of things, and again, gosh, the best laid plans in this COVID time are, you know, you just do your best. In the path forward, we mentioned that the order would be issued and put out for a 30-day public comment as of July the 15th. That date has moved back. We got word this morning that in the next 2 weeks, within the next 2 weeks, that our order will be published and published in the Federal Register for public comment, and that'll be a 30-day period. Y'all, I'm not sure how the dates relate back, and we're talking and engaging with the Department of Commerce right now. But anyway, here in the next 2 weeks, our order will be officially placed in the Federal Register and out for public comment. And I hope all of you will take the time and the interest to share your comments and your thoughts about our checkoff and what it can do for us moving forward in the future as far as our small business industry and all the good things all of us have learned over the years that it can do to help us be more successful. Let me say this. We're continuing to move forward. We've got some good things and interacting regularly with the Department of Commerce, of course, but it's still a little iffy. We're going to schedule town hall meetings for all 5 regions. We're not going to do that before the actual order is published in the Federal Register because of just these changes that we've had to make due to COVID. So, but be aware, we will be, as soon as that is published, we will be establishing some town hall meeting dates in the meantime, and to keep informed with updates that we have ongoing right now. go to the CMU checkoff website, and we'll do our best to keep y'all updated as far as that goes. Y'all, everything again is moving along fine. It's just kind of dicey as far as being able to get things done on the timely way that we'd like to, but we're still hoping for a vote this fall, and feel that that's going to be very much possible. Y'all know how I feel about the checkoff, and I know how many of y'all feel about it, and the opportunity that can bring to our industry and return our product to the rightful place that it deserves. And so with that in mind, I'm finished with what I have to say. As far as questions go, I'd be glad to, but a lot of the questions that you might have would be better if we ask those during the town hall meetings, as far as that goes, specifically on any details in general. But if you've got some general questions, I would be glad to take them at this time. All right.
Well,
Well,
thanks,
Tom,
Major.
thank you very much. Good to be with everybody. I wish it was in person, but I'm looking forward to that day. And everybody, again, be careful, be safe, and take good care. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Major. And hey, we look forward to getting this done with you. And as Major mentioned, we're going to have a lot more on this topic in some of our smaller groups and, at our town halls that are planned for later this summer. But yeah, if you do have any questions, obviously I mentioned before, you've got that Q&A section. We're not going to get to those now because we got some other speakers that we really want to hear from. But if you want to throw something in the Q&A, we'll definitely respond to any of those questions. All right, so our next speaker really is a true friend of this industry because he believes in the value of stronger and more resilient construction, and he understands how the inherent nature of concrete masonry can contribute to that goal. Evan Reese is the co-founder and executive director of the U.S. Resiliency Council. After graduating with his bachelor's and master's degree from Stanford University, spent a decade helping the university recover from the Loma Prieta earthquake. Since then, he has become a national leader in seismic risk management and now works with the public and private organizations to promote resilience and improve the performance of our nation's infrastructure in natural disasters. Vision of USRC is expanding beyond earthquakes to wildfires, wind events, and other natural disasters. I've had the privilege of hearing Evan before here speak at the Concrete Masonry Association of California and Nevada, and his message is really compelling for our industry. So with that, I'll let you take it away. Thanks, Evan.
Hey, great. Thanks to all of you. Really thanks to the organization for inviting me. As Tom says, I've really had the privilege of being able to speak to a number of folks in the concrete masonry industry over the past couple years. Really disappointed that I can't meet you all in person, but really happy to present sort of the U.S. Resiliency Council's vision of resilience and share with you some exciting recent news about our collaboration with the concrete masonry industry. So I will go ahead and start. And I'm going to talk about this focus on when we talk about sustainability, how the U.S. Resiliency Council really sees what we do and the resilience of buildings as essential to achieving that. But we need to start with understanding what the problem is. And the problem, whether it's in the United States or worldwide, is that we continue to have disasters. We continue to have billion-dollar and even $100 billion disasters every year in the world. And those numbers keep rising. The costs of those disasters keep rising. And the number of people affected and the number of casualties suffered continues to rise. And so we remain in a situation that despite all of the good work that the construction industry has done around sustainability, around green design, we continue to have this challenge of disasters happening and having major, major impact. So the U.S. Resiliency Council's primary mission, its focus, is to address through better building design how we can reduce the impacts of natural disasters. We can't prevent hurricanes or earthquakes from happening. If I could, that would be great, but we can prevent the devastating impacts. Natural hazards are inevitable, but disasters don't have to be. So I think the sort of the clearest example of this that we have in recent memory is Superstorm Sandy. Remember when that happened nearing a decade ago? Superstorm Sandy struck the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And that was an area of the country actually that had really done quite well in green design. There were many thousands of buildings that had incorporated green design, many hundreds of buildings LEED rated. But what we saw in terms of the damage that was caused in that hurricane, and this is sort of one of the kind of the mantras that we keep trying to remember at the U.S. Resiliency Council, is there is a difference between buildings that have a low impact on the environment and buildings where the environment has a low impact on them. And we saw almost 400,000 buildings damaged just in that tri-state area. And the statistic that I really like to highlight is that there were over 10 million cubic yards of debris generated by the damage caused to those buildings. And if you think about that debris had to be loaded up in trucks and hauled off into a landfill, and the thousands and thousands of truckloads and the toxic fumes that put into the atmosphere, and then all of that debris sitting in landfills, leaching toxic chemicals into the air and water. And then, of course, having to rebuild with 10 million new cubic yards of material. You have to ask in the end, how green is that? How sustainable is that to our environment? So the U.S. Resiliency Council has really been focused on how to recognize that building our buildings better contributes to their durability, which contributes to less damage after a natural hazard, which ultimately helps the environment as well. Now, in both the concrete and the concrete masonry, the sort of cementitious industries, if you think about it that way, there's been a really large focus over the past decade on sustainability measured as a function of carbon. And there's been a lot of great work. Your next speaker, Kate, from University of Washington, has done some amazing work on carbon embodiment of different materials. And that has been the primary focus, I think, of the industry over the past decade. And from the perspective of the U.S. Resiliency Council, that's really just one component of sustainability. What the U.S. Resiliency Council wants to do is merge green design and resilient design to really achieve sustainability. So again, this green design is the idea that we will have a low impact on the environment. Use more renewable materials, use more materials that can store carbon, use materials that are more durable over weathering in the long term, but then materials that will withstand the inevitable natural hazards that they will. And the value that comes from that is not only in protecting the asset itself, less damage to a building, but the value to a community or a business that uses those buildings, whether it's a grocery store or a school or apartment complex. Those buildings being able to withstand a natural hazard and still allow people to remain in them or shop in them or go to school in them makes the community more resilient and more sustainable in the long term. So that's been the focus of the U.S. Resiliency Council. And so I actually saw this slide once. I don't know if it was Kate's slide or not, so I don't take credit for it. But there's this sort of three-prong approach to sustainability that the concrete masonry industry, we believe, should be focusing on. The environmental side, which has to do, again, with the cost to the environment of buildings. The durability side, which is how buildings weather and respond over time. Better materials, stronger materials like concrete masonry just simply last longer over the course of natural weathering to the environment. But resiliency, of course, is what we're focusing on, and that is its ability to withstand the inevitable hazards that come along and still contribute not only to the building owner's recovery and success, but the larger community's recovery and success too. So the U.S. Resiliency Council was founded by myself and three other folks, two of whom were engineers like myself, but also someone in the mortgage banking industry. And it was a recognition that buildings alone don't define resilience, but buildings are a part of almost everything that does define resilience. The functions of a community or a company or a family are dependent on the behavior, the performance of building, whether it has to do with transportation or utilities or housing or food or schools. It is the social cohesiveness that is developed through being able to have functions occur in and around buildings that is essential to a community's ability to recover after natural hazards. So given that my background is in structural engineering, and most of our founding members are in the engineering or construction field, it seemed for us to focus on the built environment as a way to contribute to resilience. One of the first things we have to understand about resilience, about the way we design buildings, is there is a misconception out there about how buildings are designed currently. And that really came to a fore in the Christchurch earthquakes in New Zealand in 2010 and 2011. There were two very large earthquakes, so these would have been considered sort of the big one, right, in terms of New Zealand seismicity. And the good news is that in that earthquake, in the entire downtown area, which consisted of thousands of buildings, only 2 buildings collapsed. And the majority of the people that were killed in that earthquake occurred in those 2 collapses. And from the perspective of a structural engineer, one looks at that and says, well, this is sort of the largest event that could ever happen in New Zealand, and only 2 buildings out of thousands collapsed. That's a success from an engineering perspective, from a pure sort of code compliance perspective. But so many of the buildings were damaged that over half of them ultimately were torn down. And even today, 10 years later, only about a third of the downtown is rebuilt. So the biggest question that comes up is this miscommunication. Engineers looked at that earthquake and said, well, that was a success from the perspective of the code. But pretty much everybody else, all the people that were lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their businesses, lost their ability to work or go downtown, well, they thought it was a disaster, a complete catastrophe. And so it is changing that conception, both from the public's perspective, but also from the engineer's perspective, to be able to show them that you can achieve what the public really expects from its building, which is recovery quickly and less damage, and that it can be done at a cost that is competitive, that doesn't break the bank, that is still affordable for contractors and developers. Now, just to give you, again, a bit of a perspective on the challenge that we face, I showed you just that slide of the central business district in Christchurch, New Zealand, and mentioned that from a code perspective, buildings that comply with current codes aren't expected to collapse in a major earthquake or other natural disaster like a hurricane. But when we talk about a city, whether it's Los Angeles, as you see in this slide, it could be Chicago, it could be Portland, it could be any major city in the United States, the overwhelming majority of buildings don't even meet current code. This picture of Los Angeles, this color-coded picture, shows that only really the buildings sort of in orange and maybe in pink, which you can barely see, are those that we consider to be built towards built to modern code standards, and that over 90% of buildings are actually built before modern codes. So when we think of modern codes as producing buildings that are at least safe but could be potentially so heavily damaged that they have to be torn down, and then we say, well, 90% of buildings don't even meet that, we recognize that we have a real problem. And so we have to, as an industry, as engineering professionals, but also as construction professionals, we have to recognize that we have a big challenge for us when we build new buildings to make sure that they are the ones that can survive natural hazards and keep a community going. So that's why the USRC was founded. We have a rating system. We seem to have rating systems for everything. I mean, you can get a rating system for your dishwasher, but why don't we have a rating system for our most important asset, physical asset, our building? Probably the most important investment any building owner or any company will ever make. And we look at this rating system not just in terms of safety, the way the code does, but in terms of how much it costs to repair and how long it will take to get back into these buildings. Because ultimately, that's the important thing, right? Is that beyond safety, which of course, well, safety is the most important thing, but beyond safety, knowing how soon we'll be able to get back into buildings and how much it'll cost to repair them is essential. And what the USRC is showing is that for new building construction, that cost to go from a building that is safe but maybe a total loss to a building that is not only safe but you can reoccupy and get back in it quickly is only on the order typically of a couple of percent at most of the cost of the building. And so when you think about preserving that asset, preserving the business or the functions that go on inside that building, that minimal extra cost is really insignificant compared to the value. If you had an $80,000 Corvette and drove it into a wall at 20 miles an hour, you'd be fine, but the car would probably be a total loss. If for an extra 1%, for an extra $800, you could have that same Corvette, looks the same, drives the same, but if you drove it into a wall at 20 miles an hour, it'd be in the shop for 2 days and then good as new. Wouldn't you spend that extra 1%? If we do that for a car, why wouldn't we do it for a building that costs 10 times or 100 times as much? The good news is, from the perspective of the concrete masonry industry, is that already new buildings behave quite well. The strength, the stiffness of concrete masonry shows that compared with other more flexible materials, the recovery time in earthquakes, and it would be similar for other hazards as well. As you know, concrete masonry is very durable when it comes to wind and wildfire and flooding. But with respect to earthquake, you can see here the average sort of recovery time for a building built to modern code, subject to sort of a design level earthquake. You can see that reinforced masonry structures behave very well typically, so that the amount of time it takes to recover is greatly reduced. And we believe, from the U.S. Resiliency Council's perspective, that this is the kind of thing that the concrete masonry industry must start to promote alongside the concepts of green and environmental stewardship. The social and economic benefits of having buildings like this among the thousands of buildings in a city that will be back in operation almost immediately if they're designed well can't be left unstated, okay? When we think about natural disasters, we always think about when will people be able to get back into their apartments? When will we be able to, have food distribution? When will our schools be operable? The more we can talk about the recovery time being reduced, the better. And I think that the concrete masonry industry is really poised to be a leader in that. Because ultimately, cities, whether you're a city or whether you're a company that owns lots of buildings, you have to think holistically about your building inventory. If you're designing new buildings or replacing older facilities or even retrofitting older buildings, you think holistically about, well, if there's a natural disaster, how will the whole community be affected? Not every building has to be perfect. That's not going to happen. But if we want to make sure we have enough housing or food or schools available, we have to put into practice design standards and goals and codes that will promote going forward new buildings that are more resilient. And so that if we say to ourselves, and I'm going to show you a great example of this soon, if I show you, if I'm going to decide to build a new school in my neighborhood, do I build it out of a material, that is going to be more resistant to natural hazards, or one that's more susceptible? Well, if I look at my overall building stock, and gosh, I happen to have lots of school buildings built in the 50s and 60s that aren't very resilient, then I got to make sure that my newer buildings make up for that. So I want to pick the materials that are going to do the best. So this is a way that the concrete masonry industry can promote what it does as valuable, not just to the producers and to the builders, but to the communities themselves. So I'm very excited about a new initiative that the U.S. Resiliency Council started last year, and super excited that the concrete masonry industry was the first one to take advantage of this. And this is our Getting to Silver initiative. What we did after a study of about 6 months in conjunction with some other folks is we found that certain buildings, if built to modern codes, built basically to the code today, will inherently perform well with no extra cost associated with the design, but maybe with some minimal activities like having an engineer on retainer to look at a building after a natural disaster. We found that these buildings inherently perform well, inherently will suffer low damage, and be recoverable relatively soon. And as I just said in the previous slides, having a group of buildings, having buildings in a community or in a company that are safe and resilient and can be restored to function quickly is essential to the whole community recovery. The good news is that concrete masonry is among that list of particularly good buildings that, if designed well to modern codes, are going to behave well, are going to be recoverable relatively soon, and occupiable, and cost a minimal amount to restore. And even better news from our perspective is that the U.S. Green Buildings Council has adopted the USRC Silver rating as a rating which contributes to its new RELY standard, which is sort of a expansion of the LEED program for green design and focuses more on resilience. And so now, as you have clients that are starting to ask for buildings that are more resilient, you can note that buildings that achieve USRC ratings also contribute to this USGBC RELY method. So I'm really proud, though, to say and to thank Tom Young from the Northwest Concrete Masonry Association, Regional Association, that the first 2 buildings that were granted these silver ratings under the USRC Getting to Silver initiative were concrete masonry buildings in the Pacific Northwest. The first is perhaps the perfect example of what the USRC wants to promote, and that is the Park Rose Middle School in Portland, Oregon. This is a school, so obviously the most important assets are the children inside, not only their safety, but their ability to keep going to school after a major earthquake, say on the Cascadia subductions. So this building was just awarded a silver rating, and actually Tom is going to present that to them. He's going to put a nice sticker on the window. They've got a plaque. We're really proud that your industry was the first to take advantage of it. The second building is a little bit further north and east, the Central Spokane YMCA, YWCA. This also was a project submitted by Tom, which, again, performs great in an earthquake. It also was awarded a silver rating, and the owner of both of these projects, the middle school and the YMCA, were really thrilled to understand, to be told by Tom that these buildings would achieve this rating and this resilience rating. So they were very thrilled to know this even existed and to have their buildings showcased. So from the perspective of the U.S. Resiliency Council, we have worked very hard with the concrete masonry industry over the past several years, as Tom mentioned, and we hope to continue to work closely with you. a bit of interesting news. Of course, everybody's heard of the U.S. Green Buildings Council, and they've been around for 20 some odd years. And the U.S. Resiliency Council is still a growing nonprofit organization. But we are on track to award our 100th rating this year, which is 6 years after we started. Whereas the U.S. Green Buildings Council, it took them 12 years to issue their 100th rating. So what we're seeing is that resilience is something that is incredibly important to everybody. So important that the opportunity is there for it to take off. And we would love the concrete masonry industry to help us achieve that 100th rating. You've got these 2 ratings here with these wonderful buildings that were new structures. It took very little additional effort to get these buildings rated because they were new buildings. And so we would love to see the producers and the contractors that are listening today and watching today to help us get to that 100th rating so we can really make a big deal out of it. We would love to have concrete masonry buildings contribute significantly to the number of rated buildings that we have. So in summarizing, this is not just good for the communities, it's good for the building owners too. In places like Tokyo, Japan, where they have earthquakes all the time, they actually see a benefit, 30-40% more rent and property values by building buildings that are highly earthquake resistant. We haven't achieved that yet in the United States, but we hope to. We hope to be able to show that when you have a plaque on the building that says, this is USRC gold or platinum rated building, that somebody looks at that and says, okay, well, I'm willing to pay more for that. That makes that building more valuable. And any material system that can contribute meaningfully to those kinds of ratings will also be perceived as more valuable. So ultimately, we want to see the concrete masonry industry fire on both barrels when it comes to sustainability. The green side of things, but also the resilience side. And to do that, you have to understand your place in the resilience movement. And it's a great place. You have to understand how your buildings perform over time with respect to natural disaster. Incorporate the social and economic benefits of life cycle cost analysis into your study of the value of the building over time. Look at what it takes to take a building that might be silver rated and bring it up to gold or platinum rate. That extra 1% or 2% is minimal compared to the value it produces. So we want to be able to continue to work with the concrete masonry industry to be able to show off the sort of inherent resilience that your building styles have. So ultimately, please contact us. We'd be happy to share more with you about the USRC. I'm sure you'll probably get a copy of these slides, and of course you can always reach out to Bob to get our information. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. We're really proud of our collaboration with your industry.
Thanks very much, Evan. Hey, that's great information, and a lot of that's, stuff we can use. I love that about the recovery time, about getting back in buildings and getting people back into safe places. That speaks well of our products. Hey, maybe I got time for one quick question. If we could address one of the questions here. It says to Evan, there seems to be a very fine line between resiliency and durability. If the USRC is the driving force on resiliency, who or is there a driving force on durability?
Well, that's a good question, and certainly you're right. There's a fine line. Durability, again, it depends on how you define it, I suppose. Durability looks at the performance, the deterioration, the weathering of buildings just over over time without the impact of like a major acute shock like a natural disaster. And there are groups, and Kate, Simonin at University of Washington is one of those folks that is looking at the durability over time of concrete masonry and other materials. So the U.S. Resiliency Council is also looking at how to sort of incorporate a durability factor into its resilience rating. But, that can't go understated because obviously natural disasters certainly happen, but they don't happen that frequently, thankfully. But weathering events happen all the time. And so the more durable a building is, the less cost of repairs and remediation and maintenance that it'll have to undergo.
Thanks for answering that, Evan. And thank you again for being with us today. Really appreciate all this
Sure.
great info. And great to have you with us today. So I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Kate Simonen is a professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Washington. She is a licensed in both architect and structural engineer. Prior to joining the UW faculty, she has over 15 years of professional practice, experience bringing expertise in high-performance building systems, seismic design and retrofitting, net zero energy residential construction, prefabrication, and collaborative practice. Kate is the founding director of the Carbon Leadership Forum, an industry academic collaborative research effort focused on linking LCA to design and construction practice to advance low carbon construction. With that, Kate, let me turn the program over to you.
Great, thank you. It's really wonderful to be here today. So I'm going to be talking about embodied carbon, or the carbon emissions from manufacturing building materials over their life. And I'm going to talk about how this performance of a material is being integrated into design practice. So as mentioned, I head up the Carbon Leadership Forum. The Carbon Leadership Forum is based out of the University of Washington, but it's really a collective effort of combination of supporters from architects, engineers, material manufacturers, building owners, who are working together to advance our industry's ability to address this important issue. We do that by conducting research, so that's the fundamental academic research, looking primarily at understanding the data and the policy and strategies to reduce material impact. We create resources such as newsletters and toolkits for industry. And an area that I'm particularly excited about is the convening a network. We have a network that is a growing global collaboration with an online community platform, local hubs that are being formed from Atlanta to Vancouver to San Francisco to New York and Hong Kong and London, where individuals are coming together to share this knowledge and ability to act. And then we convene industry-led initiatives such as a Structural Engineers Challenge that we issued to challenge structural engineers to track and reduce embodied carbon to zero by 2050. That's been adopted or addressed by the American Society of Civil Engineers, and a tool that I will talk about a little bit more. So we're able to do that from a range of sponsors. So when we look at the environmental impact of buildings, we often think about the impact of operating them. So that's heating and lighting and cooling buildings, so the impacts of operating them over their lifespan. And if we look at a long lifespan of a building, from a built in the 1970s, for example, the operating impacts really dominate the total life cycle impact, from 60 to 80% over a 100-year lifespan. But the really sort of the new frontier is understanding the relative contribution of the material impacts, or the embodied carbon, and those upfront emissions happen before the building is occupied, and they are really sunk costs in the fact that they are not able to be retrofitted or change the electrical grid. So if we're looking at a total life cycle carbon assessment of a building, we're wanting to look at both the material impacts and the operating impacts. And if we look at buildings built today and their impacts between now and 2050, where global global climate targets are set, as much or more than 50% of the impacts can be related to the material. So there's been a growing movement of both awareness of the relative importance of material impact, and also the urgency of acting, because manufacturing cement and steel and carpet and sheetrock. All of these things are part of major industry, and as you know, as manufacturers, there's a significant investment that's required to change the emissions from manufacturing, and so it's not something that people can just turn on a dime and address. So at the Carbon Leadership Forum, we are recognizing that there has been a lack of awareness in the building sector related to material impacts and the need of resources to be able to address them. And this is all driven by the recognitions that buildings are a significant contributor to the global climate crisis. Here on the pie chart on the left, building operations are somewhere around 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Materials, if we look, are somewhere between 11 and 20% of total impact, depending on what materials you include in there. So the smaller pie is really just cement, steel, glass, and aluminum, and if you expand it to include the range of other building materials, we expect that to be larger. And so as corporations, states, and others are setting climate targets, they're needing to look and address all the sectors of the economy and how to decarbonize. Here I have a graph from California. So California has set global or set their own greenhouse gas emission targets, and so you can see here on this plot that so the GDP of California is increasing between 2000 and 2017. The population is increasing between now and 2017, but their emissions have gone down, and their emissions have gone down per capita and per GDP, and that's because they've made a lot of investments in clean energy transformation. However, when you look at materials, often material impacts take place outside of state, and so one of the interesting things that has come out is the concept of a carbon loophole. When you're looking at decarbonizing, you want to make sure that you don't outsource your manufacturing to somewhere else that you're not tracking. So the California tracks the emissions that take place in California, but if you purchase goods outside of California, you're not addressing it. So this is another aspect of interest in understanding the environmental impact of purchased goods that might be made out of state or out of country. So life cycle assessment is the method that's used to calculate the environmental impacts throughout a life cycle. It is environmental accounting. It's tracking how much is extracted from nature, like clean water or coal, and then what's emitted to nature. So that's emissions to both the air and the water and the soil. And an environmental life cycle assessment tracks the impact over that whole life from the beginning when you're extracting materials, transporting them, manufacturing. That's sort of the first upfront emissions, and then the impact of use and end of life and disposal. So this is similar to life cycle costing. So you may have heard of life cycle cost assessment track dollars over the entire life of an asset, and environmental life cycle assessment is tracking emissions such as carbon. So if we're looking to understand and estimate the embodied carbon of a building, there's two parts to it. One is the quantities of material that you use, and then the environmental impact of each of those materials. And so in order to do an embodied carbon estimate or a life cycle assessment of a building practitioners need to understand how much material they're using and ideally optimize the amount of material, and then select what type of material. Sometimes that's between different options, like I might be choosing between a concrete structure or a steel structure, or a glass curtain wall versus a solid wall. So I'm turning between material types, and also it can be between the same material type. So am I choosing, who am I providing choosing to source my steel. When you're looking to reduce the embodied carbon of buildings, there's really three main strategies that people can use. So the first strategy is about using materials smartly, and that would fit into Evan's presentation about resilient buildings. If you can design a building that you don't have to replace multiple times over its life, or you're retrofitting an existing building, you build a smaller building, so anything you can do to use less materials overall is probably the highest first choice for reductions. If we're looking at the next strategy of reducing embodied carbon, that would be building smart. So that's what I was talking about perhaps choosing different material systems or solutions, and that really has to be done in a total life cycle approach. So if I only look up at the upfront emissions of one option, so let's say you build a concrete masonry building that has a really good thermal performance, and you compare it to a light frame building that doesn't have as much insulation, that doesn't perform as well in earthquakes, and doesn't have it changes the operating energy impact. You wouldn't want you need to look at this with a whole life cycle approach. You can't just look at the upfront emissions. You have to look at the use and end of life impact. If you're looking into the buy smart method, this would be when you were trying to choose between two suppliers of the same thing. So I know I want to make a concrete masonry building, but I'm interested in having the lowest embodied carbon concrete block system that I have. And so in this case, you're looking to identify similar or nearly identical performance in materials, so equal in terms of how they perform in terms of strength or thermal performance, and you're wanting to compare which one has a lower or higher embodied carbon footprint. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about buy smart methodology here. That is being done in practice using something called environmental product declarations. So environmental product declarations are effectively the nutrition label for environmental impact. And so instead of a cup of cereal, you have a cubic yard of concrete, or a kilogram of steel. And environmental product declarations report environmental impact like embodied carbon, and they are really more like a miles per gallon of a car than it's a slightly better analogy, because they are estimates based on standard assumptions based on the manufacturing process. We can't actually measure them. You can't take a chunk of concrete and measure its embodied carbon, because it's actually the emissions that took place in the past while making it. So there's known variability in these results, just like we know that there's not the miles per gallon on a car is not exact. It depends on how you drive the track, but they are directionally accurate, so they can tell us which options are lower impact than others. So in order to use EPDs, or environmental product declarations, into getting an estimate of embodied carbon, the Carbon Leadership Forum helped to develop a tool called the Embodied Carbon Construction Calculator. This is a database of EPDs that has been where we've done a lot of work on the back end in order to be aggregating like materials. So you're not comparing a concrete block to a glue laminated beam, that you need to be comparing materials based on similar performance aspects. And as we look at the transition, so now I want to talk a little bit about a vision of a future. So a future vision of the future is, instead of thinking about our industrial manufacturing as producing goods for us and also releasing emissions into the atmosphere, can we look to a future in which we are not emitting carbon, but we're rather using carbon dioxide as a feedstock, So you'll see that starting to happen as some of the carbon additives to concrete. But there's a lot of other potential of developing carbon fiber, using carbon capture, so that we can radically reduce, ultimately eliminate the emissions that are taking place, and get to a place where we are effectively growing buildings or storing material, storing carbon in buildings. So we can see innovations at the lab scale happening where people are growing concrete with algae as a cementitious material. We're growing aggregate, so storing carbon and putting it into rock that could become building bones, or curing concrete with CO2. There are other options of bio-based materials, from long-life wood products, or taking agricultural waste and putting it into building products. So that's not cow poop, it's straw and other things like that, and other bio-based installations or innovations in steel, like hydrogen steel production. So there's a lot of R&D happening, exploring alternative materials, and how things like, particularly in this industry, I could have had the, hemp block or the hempcrete solutions. So then Body Carbon and Construction Calculator is a free tool to use. So if you go onto buildingtransparency.org, you can use the tool to build up an analysis at a building scale. This is an example of a total building carbon footprint that's made up of concrete, steel, sheetrock, and others. And what we have in the tool is the ability to see within each material grouping what are the opportunities for improvement. So we're showing the range within each material category. And some material categories have very large ranges between the highest carbon impact material and the lowest carbon impact material. And concrete and concrete masonry have an advantage in that the design and optimization of their products can happen through the mixture design, as opposed to a totally new plant or a totally new energy source, which is what's required if you're looking to reduce carbon footprint of something like structural steel. So I welcome you all to log on to the Building Transparency website and look around. You can see what suppliers have EPDs available. That project was supported by a really broad range of industry, from building owners like Google to general contractors like Skanska, to industry trade organizations. We received funding from both concrete, steel, and wood, and a wide range of material suppliers and architects and engineers. So we're really excited about how that is moving forward. So I guess I have two wrap-up slides. One is that just a reminder that if you want to look at building decarbonization, you really have to look at the total carbon impact. That includes the embodied impacts of material and the operating impacts of heating, cooling, and lighting. And that I encourage you to explore the resources that we have at the Carbon Leadership Forum's website, and consider joining us. It's a free to join. You get access to an online community forum, and also invitations to regional events that you might be interested in. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks, Kate. Hey, any chance I can get you on the webcam? And I do have a couple of questions for you that came in.
Oh, that's too bad.
Don't worry.
I've seen myself
We're not
going to
let you off the hook. We're not going to let you off the hook that easy.
Okay. Whoops. Yeah, but see, my thing is so funny. I just touched it now.
Pearly
okay.
white.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's funny. I've been looking at myself the whole time.
No problem. No problem. So I got a question here. Says, Kate, does the EC3 calculator account for carbon sequestration of concrete products over time?
So if you're talking about the carbon that is absorbed in concrete during its use phase, currently it does not. Yes, it does not, and so that is because we are reporting data that's being reported in the Environmental Product Declaration, and that's not yet standardized in that process.
Excellent. Let's see. I think I got one more here if I can find it. It's basically asking, Kate, what recommendation, do you have a recommendation for us as concrete block producers as far as anything we can do to put us in a better position with designers?
So I think probably the best one is to be really clear and transparent about what you're doing to address the embodied carbon impacts of your materials. And so I think that would be being upfront and transparent about that. So that's getting an environmental product declaration and understanding what your pathways to decarbonization are. So architects and engineers are not, they understand that all materials have impact and that all materials have benefits. And so being clear and proud about the benefits that you have, but also being aware of the fact that you do have a responsibility to understand and reduce those impacts over time. So, you know, manufacturers that are really clear that they have a strategy, that strategy doesn't need to be immediate. A strategy could be a 10-year plan. A strategy is a 5-year plan. How are you integrating that into your practices? Do you know what are the barriers in your sector, and how are you part of the solution? I think you know, there are low carbon concrete block solutions out there, and so you should at least know, if you're not providing them, you should know why.
Good point. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. Really appreciate you being here with us today, and a lot of great information again. Stuff that we can all chew on and you know, move forward on. So thank you very much, and appreciate you being here today.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you.
Glad to see you live too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, before we end the session, stand by here for a word. We do have a word from one of our sponsors coming up, and that is MASA. Thank you, Masa. That was a great video, and appreciate you guys sharing with that information with us today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I also want to thank our speakers for sharing their insights with us, and our sponsors, of course, for their support. We do have a poll that would be very helpful for your feedback, so that's important to us. If you guys would be kind enough to fill out that poll. Lastly, let's see. There we go. Lastly, be sure to join us for these sessions coming up next, and we hope you can join us tonight for a special presentation by some familiar faces. We'll have Dean Jurek, Donna Palladino, Rocky Pisano, They'll all be competing head-to-head in the Golden Garlic competition. So that'll be interesting. Looks like we got a couple of Italian people with some Italian heritage there that have probably cooked a lot with garlic, and then we got Dean Jurek in there, but he's a garlic connoisseur, so I'm sure he'll be a pretty formidable opponent there. So, and then following that tonight, we'll have Terry Grolke and unveiling her very own NCMA President's Secret Passion. So be sure to tune in for that one. We want to know what tickles Bob's fancy, so tune in for that one. And again, enjoy your day, enjoy the rest of the presentations today, and look forward to seeing you at some more events.